The call came on a Tuesday evening in September, just as the sun was melting into the Arno Valley and turning the hills of Tuscany the color of warm copper. I was sitting on the stone terrace of my rental house outside Florence, holding a glass of Chianti that the old man at the market had pressed into my hands and told me to drink slowly. I had been taking his advice. For the first time in 40 years, I had nowhere to be and nothing to fix. Then my phone buzzed against the table. I looked at the screen. The name there stopped me cold. It was my wife, my ex-wife, the woman who had handed me divorce papers in our own kitchen 8 months earlier while her new boyfriend's car sat idling in my driveway. I should have let it ring. I had blocked her number once already, but my lawyer had convinced me to unblock it in case there were legal matters still unresolved. Now I sat there watching her name pulse on the screen, and I felt something that surprised me. Not anger, not longing. Just a very calm curiosity about which version of the disaster she was calling to report. I answered, "Walter." Her voice was fractured, high and breathless. "Walter, you have to come back. You have to call someone. The police are here, and Derek is screaming at them, and I don't know what to do. My credit cards are all declined. The bank froze the account. They're saying the gallery is under seizure. Please, Walter, you're the only one who knows how to fix things." I took a slow sip of the wine. It tasted of dark cherries and old soil. "Do you remember what I told you the night you asked me to leave?" I said. "Walter, this is not the time for one of your lectures. I told you that you cannot finish a beautiful piece with rotten wood," I continued. "It doesn't matter how much varnish you put on it. The grain always tells the truth eventually. Please." I ended the call and placed the phone face down on the warm stone. Above me, swallows were cutting through the darkening sky. Below the terrace, an old couple walked slowly along the gravel path, arm in arm. Neither of them was in a hurry. I poured myself another glass and thought about how long it had taken me to get here. Not to Tuscany. To this particular stillness. To understand why I did not get on a plane, you need to understand the kind of man I was for 32 years. My name is Walter Dempsey. I am 67 years old, and I spent my working life as a master carpenter and woodworker out of Portland, Oregon. I built custom furniture for architects, for estates, for museums. I understood wood the way a surgeon understands bone. I could look at a piece of walnut and read its entire history in the grain. I knew where it would hold and where it would give. I applied the same thinking to everything, including my marriage. I met my wife young. We were both 23. She was beautiful and restless, and I was steady and patient. And for a long time, those two things fit together the way a mortise fits a tenon. Clean, tight, load-bearing. For 30 years, I built the life we lived in. The house in Lake Oswego was mine, designed by me, built by my hands, and the hands of men I had trained. The workshop behind it was my cathedral. I had a reputation in the Pacific Northwest that took me 3 decades to earn. When wealthy collectors wanted a piece that would outlast them, they came to me. When museums needed restoration work on antique pieces, they called me. I charged accordingly, and I saved accordingly, and I invested accordingly, and my wife spent accordingly, which I accepted because I loved her, and because the math still worked. Then it stopped working. I noticed the change about 2 years before she handed me the papers. The dinners out became more frequent. New clothes arrived in boxes I was not consulted about. She started talking about a man named Derek at dinner. Derek thinks this, Derek says that. Derek went to this gallery opening, that fundraiser. She described him the way people describe a movie they've seen that they think you would not understand. Derek Marsh was 48 years old, which made him 8 years younger than her and 19 years younger than me. He ran what he called an art investment fund. He wore linen shirts that were always slightly wrinkled in the way that is designed to look casual but actually costs money. He drove a new Range Rover and talked with the easy confidence of a man who has never had to read the fine print on anything. The night she handed me the papers, I was coming in from the workshop. I had been finishing a dining table commissioned by a family in Seattle. 7-foot black walnut slab. I had been working on the joinery for 3 weeks. My hands were clean, but my work clothes smelled of linseed oil and sawdust. And when I walked into the kitchen, I saw the envelope on the counter, and her standing by the window, with her arms crossed over her chest. And I knew before she spoke what the envelope contained. I want a divorce, Walter. I set my tool belt on the chair and picked up the envelope. I opened it with the same deliberateness I use when I open a piece of wood I'm not sure about. Slowly, paying attention. 32 years, I said. Is this about Derek? It's about me, she said. It's about the fact that I have spent 30 years watching you disappear into that workshop every night. It's about the fact that you talk about wood more than you talk to me. It's about the fact that Derek looks at me like I'm worth looking at, and you look at me like I'm a piece of furniture that's already finished. I thought about the chair I had built her for our 30th anniversary. It had taken me 4 months. White oak with hand-cut dovetails and a seat contoured to the exact shape of her back. I had measured her without her knowing. I had studied the way she sat. I had finished it with an oil she liked the smell of. She had cried when I uncovered it. That was a year ago. I put the papers back in the envelope. What do you want from the settlement? She told me. She wanted the house. She wanted the Range Rover she drove, which was actually mine. She wanted half the savings account and a portion of my pension. What she did not want, she made clear, was the workshop. She never wanted the workshop. She wanted me to clear out my tools and let Derek convert it into a studio for his clients. I kept my face very still. Fine, I said. I have one condition. The workshop stays as it is until I've had 30 days to remove my equipment. Fine, she said. She seemed surprised I hadn't argued. Our son was 29. He was living in Seattle working for a tech company that he described as disrupting something I never fully understood. When I called him that night from a hotel room, he already knew. She had called him first. Dad, I'm sorry, he said. But honestly, I think this is probably good for both of you. You two have been running on fumes for a while. Running on fumes. I thought about 32 years of mortgage payments, about the college fund, about the summer I worked 7 days a week for 4 months straight to cover a debt his mother had accumulated without telling me. Do you know Derek? I asked. I've met him a couple times. He's actually a really smart guy. He knows people, Dad. He got me an introduction to a VC firm last month that I've been trying to reach for a year. I understand, I said. You're not mad? I'm not mad, I said. I just need you to do one thing for me. Come back to Portland before I leave. Have coffee with me. He said he would. He did not. I spent the next 3 weeks in the workshop, not grieving, planning. I knew things about my finances that my wife did not know because she had never wanted to know. She knew about the savings account and the pension. She did not know about the annuity I had taken out 15 years earlier through a private instrument that was titled in the name of my single-member LLC, Dempsey Custom Works. She did not know about the 3 parcels of timberland I had purchased in Clatsop County over the course of a decade as an investment and a hedge. She did not know that the workshop itself, while physically located on our property, was registered as a commercial asset under the LLC, and therefore not subject to the marital asset division without a separate legal action she had not thought to initiate. Her lawyer was aggressive but young. My lawyer was older than both of us combined, and had spent 30 years working for timber and property companies. He found the gaps she had left. In the settlement, she got the house, she got the Range Rover, she got the savings account and a partial pension payment. The timber parcels stayed with the LLC. The workshop contents stayed with the LLC, and buried in the property transfer documents, at the insistence of my lawyer, was a covenant that restricted any structural modification to the workshop building itself without written consent from Dempsey Custom Works, which meant without written consent from me. She signed without reading it. Her boyfriend was waiting outside with the engine running. On my last morning in the house I had built, I went through the workshop room by room. I photographed every tool and recorded every serial number in a ledger I kept. I moved the irreplaceable pieces out. The hand planes my father had given me. The 19th century chisels I had found at an estate sale in Vermont. A set of Japanese marking gauges that had taken me 2 years to acquire. What I left behind, I left intentionally. A set of power tools that appeared valuable but were registered in the LLC inventory. A bandsaw with a custom blade that required specific knowledge to operate safely. A collection of specialty wood stains, whose formulas I had developed myself and never written down, stored in unlabeled bottles on a shelf. I also disabled the climate control system in the workshop before I left, the temperature and humidity regulation that kept the expensive wood stock stable. It looked like it was running. The display showed normal numbers, but the sensors I had rewired were reading from a small false loop I had installed in the wall cavity. The actual air in the room would cycle through whatever the Oregon coast decided to deliver. Wood moves in humidity. If you don't control the environment, it moves in ways you cannot predict. Every piece of stock I left in that room would begin to warp and check within 6 weeks. I left the key on the counter next to a note that said, "Good luck with the grain." I drove to the airport. I had a one-way ticket to Florence. I want to tell you about the workshop the way I should, because it matters to what comes later. I had built it myself 20 years earlier. Post and beam construction, Douglas fir, with a timber frame I designed to allow natural light from 3 angles throughout the day. The floor was thick, poured concrete, sealed with an aggregate I had mixed myself. There was a skylight over the main bench that I had glazed with glass, salvaged from a demolished greenhouse in Eugene. The smell of it, when you walked in on a winter morning, was wood and oil, and the specific quiet that exists only in places where careful work is done. I had spent more honest hours in that room than anywhere else in my life. My son had played in that workshop as a child. He had learned to sand a piece of wood to glass smoothness in that workshop. He had built his first birdhouse on the bench I made from a piece of reclaimed bowling alley floor. I thought about that on the plane. Florence in late autumn is a particular kind of beautiful that operates below the surface. The tourists thin out. The light goes golden and low. The city stops performing and starts simply being. I rented a farmhouse outside the city from a woman whose family had owned the land since the 14th century, and I paid 3 months in advance, and I set up a small portable bench in the stone outbuilding and began, for the first time in years, to make things purely for myself. I was not hiding. I was restoring. I met Carla at a Wednesday market in the village below the hill. She was a furniture conservator who worked with the regional museum system. She was 62. With close-cropped gray hair and the hands of someone who had spent a career understanding old things. When I told her what I did for a living, she looked at my hands for a long moment and said, in English with a slight accent, "You actually work with your hands." Most Americans who say that mean they supervise. I laughed for the first time in months. We began having lunch on Thursdays, then dinners. She did not ask me about my past, and I did not volunteer it. We talked about wood. We talked about the specific qualities of Italian walnut versus American black walnut. We talked about the difference between patina and deterioration. She had opinions, and she defended them, and she was not always right, and she knew it, and that made her wonderful company. I was careful with my happiness. Happiness felt fragile still, like a piece I hadn't finished yet. Then the notifications started. I had not deleted the monitoring software from the Portland property. It was linked to the workshop's environmental sensors. My legitimate ones. The ones still transmitting accurately. I watched the humidity readings climb through October and into November. The system logged data I could check from my phone. On a Thursday in late November, I opened the app and saw that the temperature in the workshop had spiked to levels incompatible with stored wood. Someone had brought in additional heating equipment and cranked it to compensate for the cold. The relative humidity in the room had dropped to 18%. At that level, the 1-inch cherry panels I had left behind would cup and split within days. The large walnut slab I had been roughing out before I left would develop checks across the face. I took a screenshot and forwarded it to my lawyer. Evidence, I wrote. They modified the climate system in the LLC-registered workspace. My lawyer wrote back within the hour. Already on it. Also, you should know Derek Marsh filed for a home equity line of credit last week using the Lake Oswego property. The title search flagged the commercial covenant on the workshop. The bank put the application on hold. He's going to find out about the covenant soon. Good, I wrote. Let him find out. Let him understand what he can't touch. 2 days later, my son called me on a number I didn't recognize. I had blocked his regular line after he missed our coffee meeting without calling. I didn't know it was him until I answered. Dad. His voice was tighter than I remembered. More adult. Can you talk? I'm here, I said. He was quiet for a moment. I heard city noise behind him. He was outside somewhere. Probably the sidewalk in front of his office. I need you to know something about Derek, he said. I waited. He reached out to me last month. Not about the VC introduction. About you. He wanted to know what tools and equipment were in the workshop. He wanted to know if the tools were yours personally or if they were the company's. He wanted to know if you had kept any records off-site. Why did he want to know that? He's planning to sell the workshop contents, my son said. He told Mom the tools are outdated anyway, and he wants to convert the space into a client entertainment room. He said the tools would fetch enough at auction to help cover a shortfall. What shortfall? My son took a long breath. I've been looking into him, Dad. Because of the VC thing. When he mentioned your name, I started paying attention more carefully. His fund has no public track record. The firm he said he ran closed 2 years ago under an SEC inquiry that was dropped without charges, but still, I reached out to someone at the firm. The people who worked for him haven't been paid since spring. The Range Rover he drives is a leaseback scheme. He doesn't own anything, Dad. He operates entirely on other people's assets. I looked out at the hills. The olive trees were silver in the afternoon light. Why are you telling me now? I asked. Because he asked me to sign a letter of reference for a private lending application, my son said. And something about it felt wrong. I told him I needed a few days to review. He got angry and reasoned it now to Resudian stated and can be 2 to 5. And Resudian stated, and I without thanks to that. He said I was being ungrateful after everything he'd done for me. I thought about the VC introduction, the carefully placed favor. He was buying you, I said. I know that now. I didn't say I told you so. I wanted to. I let it pass. Don't sign the letter, I said. Don't put your name on anything connected to him. What are you going to do? I'm going to let the grain do the talking, I said. He didn't understand what I meant, and I didn't explain. I had a contact in Portland named Raymond Fossey. I had known him for 20 years through the timber industry. He was not a warm man. He was a very precise man who dealt in private, secured lending for commercial real estate and resource investments. He had helped me structure the timber parcel purchases years earlier. And when we finished that deal, he had told me that if I ever needed a door opened or closed, I should call him. I called him from the terrace at 9 in the evening Italian time, which was noon in Portland. Raymond answered on the second ring. Walter, I heard you moved to Europe. For now, I said. I have a question about a man named Derek Marsh. Raymond was quiet for 3 seconds. That's an interesting name for you to bring up. You know him? I know his paperwork, Raymond said carefully. He approached my office 6 weeks ago about a bridge loan. Used a Lake Oswego residential property as collateral. My due diligence team flagged a commercial covenant on the property that he either didn't know about or hoped we wouldn't find. He didn't know about it, I said. I put it there. Another pause. Then Raymond made a sound that was not quite a laugh. The workshop clause. The workshop clause, I confirmed. He told my office the covenant was invalid. He said the original owner had abandoned the LLC, and the registration had lapsed. Has it lapsed? Raymond asked. I filed the annual renewal 3 weeks before I left the country, I said. The LLC is fully active. He cannot modify, sell, lease, or encumber anything in that building without my written consent. I thought so, Raymond said. I declined the application. He was not gracious about it. I imagine not. Walter. Raymond's voice shifted slightly. This man owes money to several parties I'm aware of. If he has been representing that property as unencumbered collateral in multiple applications, he has a fraud exposure that is not small. I know, I said. I think he's about to make a very public move that would be the right moment for the people he owes to make their position clear. What move? He's planning an event at the house next month. A gallery event, I think. A launch for this investment fund he's been pitching. My wife is hosting it. There will be press, collectors, money. Raymond was quiet again. The kind of quiet that meant he was thinking precisely. That would be a shame to interrupt, he said. It would be a perfect time to interrupt, I said. I'll make some calls, Raymond said. I have a colleague in the financial crimes unit at the state level who has been building a file on Marsh for some time. They've been waiting for him to surface publicly. Thank you, Raymond. Don't thank me, he said. He strung along 3 clients of mine last year with promissory notes that bounced. This is professional. I hung up. Below the terrace, Carla's old car was pulling up the gravel drive. She had brought dinner from the village. I could smell the bread from 20 feet away. I did not tell her what I had just done. I just helped her carry the bags inside and opened the second bottle of wine and listened to her talk about a 16th century armoire she had been reassembling all week. And I thought about how a life can feel like a room you have finally learned the proportions of. The gallery event was scheduled for a Saturday in December. I had access to the workshop sensors, which I had never removed, and through those, I had patched a connection to the security camera on the exterior of the workshop. I could not see inside the house, but I could see the driveway, the garden, and the entrance to the workshop building. At 7 in the evening Portland time, I opened my laptop in the stone outbuilding and watched the driveway fill with cars. They were good cars, the kind that said money without announcing it. I recognized the neighborhood. I had built furniture for 3 of those families. Derek was visible briefly on the exterior camera, standing at the entrance to the garden, working the crowd. He wore a dark suit and moved with the fluency of a man who had practiced charm the way other men practice a golf swing. My wife stood next to him in a dress that caught the garden lights. She looked happy. She looked the way people look when they have convinced themselves that the life they constructed is real. I watched the event through the limited frame of the camera, which covered only the exterior. For 40 minutes, nothing unusual happened. Then a black SUV pulled into the driveway and blocked the 2 cars closest to the exit. 3 men stepped out. The first one I recognized even at this resolution, because Raymond had sent me a photo. Gil Torres, a senior investigator with the Oregon Department of Finance and Corporate Securities. He was compact and methodical in his movements, wearing a plain coat, holding a leather folder. With him were 2 men in suits who were clearly not guests. Behind the SUV, a county sheriff's vehicle pulled to the curb. I turned up the audio on the camera, which had a microphone that had never been worth much. I could hear fragments, the name, Derek Marsh. I could hear the change in the ambient sound of the party, the specific frequency shift that happens when a room full of people collectively understands that something has gone wrong. I heard my wife's voice, high and confused. Then Derek's voice, lower and harder, and suddenly stripped of the polish. Then a sound I recognized. The sound of a door being held open by an officer while someone was guided through it. I watched Derek Marsh walk across my driveway in handcuffs. He was still in his suit. He looked diminished. He looked like a piece of furniture that had finally been turned over, revealing the cheap secondary wood used on the back and bottom, the parts the buyer never sees until it's too late. I poured myself a glass of water and watched until the vehicles left. My phone rang. I knew who it would be before I looked. I answered the way I had been waiting to answer for months, without saying hello, just listening. Walter. Her voice was wrecked. She had been crying, and now she was beyond crying, at the flat, cold stage that comes after. Walter. They arrested him. They're saying fraud. Wire fraud. They're saying he used my name on documents. Walter. They're saying I might be considered an accessory. The gallery is seized. The account he put the event deposits in, it's frozen. I have guests standing in my driveway, and I don't know what to tell them. I said, "Do you remember what I told you when you asked me to leave?" Walter, please. I told you that you can't finish a beautiful piece with rotten wood, I said again. I told you, the grain always tells the truth. He was going to change everything, she said. Her voice had the hollow sound of a woman reciting a story she no longer believed. He was going to make us financially independent. He was going to reposition your reputation, get the furniture line into galleries. He was positioning himself, I said. He used your name and your address and your social credibility and your access to my property to leverage other people's money. That's all he did. I don't know what to do. Call your sister, I said. She's always been the practical one. And call a criminal attorney in the morning. Not a divorce attorney, a criminal one. Walter, goodbye, I said. I'm sorry for your trouble. I ended the call. I put the phone down and sat in the dark of the outbuilding for a few minutes. Above me, through the open door, the Tuscan sky was enormous and very clear. I thought about the workshop in Portland. I thought about the climate sensors still transmitting their data to my phone, still measuring the environment I had spent 2 decades calibrating. I thought about the wood in there, warping slowly in the artificial heat Derek had installed. The beautiful grain opening along lines I could have predicted from the first day, because that's what wood does when you don't treat it with the respect it requires. I thought about my son. He had called me twice in the weeks after we spoke about Derek. I had not answered. I was not ready to, and I did not think he was ready either. There is a kind of repair that cannot be rushed. You cannot force a joint to cure. You let the glue set at its own speed, or you weaken it. The weeks after the gallery event moved quietly. Raymond sent me a summary from his contact at the securities office. The charges against Derek Marsh were extensive. 3 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of securities fraud, misrepresentation on 6 separate loan applications, including the one that used my property as collateral. The investigation had been building for 2 years. The gallery event, with its public guest list and its clear record of funds solicited under false pretenses, had given the investigators the clean public moment they needed. Derek was denied bail on the federal charges. He would be in the system for a long time. My wife was not charged. She had not known enough of the specifics to be considered a participant, according to Raymond's contact. But the house was subject to a civil lien until the investigation concluded. She could not sell it, could not refinance it, could not use it as collateral. The event deposits were frozen. The caterer, the lighting company, and 3 art dealers who had agreed to consign work through Derek's fund had all filed civil claims. She was not in prison. But she was standing in the rubble of a life she had built from borrowed material. My son called again in January. This time I answered. He was calling from outside. I could hear Portland rain. "I don't need anything from you," he said immediately. "I just want to say something and then I'll leave you alone if that's what you want." "Go ahead," I said. "I quit my job." I waited. "Derek's introduction to the VC firm," my son said. "I looked into it more carefully after I called you. The firm he introduced me to had a prior business relationship with one of his shell companies. The partner I met, I think I was being positioned as a referral source for wealthy clients. I was a tool, same as Mom. I didn't see it until I started looking. "I'm sorry," I said. And I meant it. "I got a job at a furniture restoration workshop in Seattle," he said. "Entry level. Stripping and sanding mostly. The owner knows your work. He has one of your early pieces, a walnut sideboard you made maybe 25 years ago. He showed it to me my first week. He was quiet. I was quiet. "I remember what the workshop smelled like when I was a kid," he said. "I remember you letting me use the hand plane when I was maybe 8 years old, and you guided my hands, and the shaving came off in one long curl, and I thought it was the most incredible thing I had ever seen." I remembered that morning. It was a Saturday. He had been wearing rubber boots for some reason. "I'm not asking to come back in," my son said. "I know I don't have the right to ask that. I just wanted you to know I finally understand what you were building. And I understand why you stopped building it for people who couldn't see it." I sat in the outbuilding for a long time after we hung up. In front of me on the workbench was a small cabinet I had been making for the past 3 weeks. Chestnut and cherry, hand-cut dovetails, fitted with antique brass hinges Carla had found in a reclamation shop in the city. It was going to be beautiful. Not the largest thing I had made or the most technically complex, just the most honest. I thought about what my son had said about the shaving curling off the plane. That moment when the tool and the wood and the hand all find the same angle and the material opens along its truest line. It does not happen by force. It happens by attention, by understanding the grain before you touch it. Some relationships are like that. You have to know what you're working with before you decide how to proceed. I did not send my son money. I did not call him back that evening. But I wrote down the name of his employer in Seattle, and I made a note to contact the owner in the spring about a restoration project I had been considering for a museum inquiry I'd received. Whether my son would be involved in that project I did not yet know. I would see how the wood moved first. The house in Lake Oswego sold at reduced value 7 months after the civil lien was released. My wife moved to an apartment in the Pearl District. She got a position doing event coordination for a mid-size architecture firm. I heard this from her sister, who had become an occasional correspondent. "She works hard," the sister wrote. "She is learning what things actually cost." I read that twice and did not respond. The timber parcels in Clatsop County I donated to a land trust that was establishing a working forest program for young people interested in sustainable trades. The donation was tax-structured through the LLC, which my lawyer handled efficiently. In exchange for the donation, the trust named a small building on the property after my father, who had been a logger before me, and who had taught me that the best thing a man can do with the land is understand it before he touches it. Carla and I drove out to see the land in June, when I came back briefly to conclude some legal matters. She stood at the edge of the tree line and looked into the canopy for a long time. Then she turned to me and said, "It's very old." I nodded. "Some of it is second growth from the 30s, I said. "Some of it is older." She asked me how I could tell. I pointed to the way the trunks tapered, the pattern of the bark, the distance between the lowest branches and the ground. "You read trees the way I read furniture," she said. "That's exactly right," I told her. We drove back to Portland for dinner, and I did not feel like a ghost there. I felt like a man who had passed through a place and left it correctly arranged. I am writing this from the terrace. The Arno Valley is full of morning fog that will burn off by 10. Carla is inside making coffee, which she does with a seriousness I have come to understand is her way of showing affection. She does not waste ceremony. When she takes care with something, it means something. People ask about revenge sometimes. They want it to be a weapon, a precision instrument aimed at a specific target with a satisfying result. And I understand that. I felt that, briefly, when Raymond's men pulled into my driveway and Derek Marsh walked out of my house in handcuffs. There was a clean, cold satisfaction in that moment. But that was not the thing. The thing was not the arrest, or the lien, or the frozen accounts, or my wife standing in the December cold realizing the man she had chosen was a surface with nothing underneath it. The thing was the workshop covenant. The thing was 30 days of quiet preparation, while everyone assumed I was simply wounded and compliant. The thing was understanding that a man who knows the material, who has spent 40 years learning the grain, does not need to apply force. He just needs to position the work correctly and let the properties of the thing do what they will inevitably do. Rotten wood does not need your help to fail. It only needs you to stop propping it up. I had spent 32 years being the structural element in a house where no one understood what held the walls up. The day I stopped being that element, the walls told everyone what they were made of. I don't say that with bitterness. I say it with the clarity of a man who is sitting on a warm stone terrace watching fog lift off a valley that has been beautiful for several thousand years and will be beautiful long after all of us are done with our grievances. My coffee is here. The fog is moving. Below the terrace, in the small stone outbuilding, there is a nearly finished cabinet waiting for its final fitting. The joints are true. The surface is ready for oil. It will be done by the end of the week. I am Walter Dempsey. I am 67 years old. I have spent my life understanding what holds things together and what causes them to come apart. I have been a husband, a father, a craftsman, and a fool in roughly equal measure. I have been underestimated by people who should have known better, and now they are learning the cost of that at their own pace, without my help. I am finally, genuinely, working only on things worth building. And from where I am sitting, the grain looks very good.